You are not tired because life is chaotic. You are tired because nothing inside you ever truly settles. Your days keep moving forward, but they never quite arrive. One responsibility ends and another begins. And in the narrow space between the two, you slowly lose your sense of presence. You wake up already carrying weight, and you go to sleep without feeling complete. Even moments of rest feel uneasy, as though stopping might cause something important to slip away. From the outside, your life may look stable. You function, you meet expectations, you handle what needs to be handled. You have learned how to keep everything moving. Yet inside, a quiet strain remains, never fully releasing. Nothing feels broken, but nothing feels aligned either. This is a kind of chaos that is difficult to see. It does not announce itself through collapse or failure. It lives in constant mental noise and in the feeling that you are always responding to life, but never truly arriving in it. You solve one problem only to prepare for the next, and there is never a moment when effort settles into peace. So you begin to search for the cause outside yourself. You think of work pressure, money, relationships, or lack of time. And these things do matter, but if you look more closely, you will notice something else. Even when nothing is required of you, the noise continues. The mind keeps circling, planning, replaying, tightening its grip. From this, the truth slowly becomes clear. The chaos that exhausts you is not around you. It is within you. Accepting this is uncomfortable because it removes the ease of blame. Yet at the same time, it lifts something heavier, shame. You are not failing at life. You are simply living out of sync with your natural rhythm without realizing it. You were never taught how to live in alignment. You were taught how to strive and endure. You learned how to keep moving forward, but not how to remain still without fear. You learned how to add effort, but not how to release what no longer belongs. Over time, your life became crowded, not only with tasks, but with identities, roles you maintain, expectations you carry, versions of yourself you continue to perform long after they stop being true. Each one pulls you in a different direction, and together they create inner disorder. Yet in Daoist understanding, chaos is not something wrong. It is information. It is a signal from the body and mind, telling you that you are forcing where you should be yielding, holding where you should be releasing, and moving when it is time to settle. The problem is not that you want too much. The problem is that you are gripping too tightly. And so you grow tired, not the kind of tired sleep can't fix, but the kind that comes from living against the current for too long. Before anything can change, this must be seen clearly and without judgment, not as a flaw to correct, but as a condition you have been living inside. For now, there is nothing to fix. Simply recognize this. The chaos you feel is not asking to be defeated. It is asking to be listened to. And listening does not mean solving. It means allowing yourself to stay with what is present without immediately trying to escape it. For once, you do not rush to make the feeling productive. You do not translate it into action. You do not demand that it justify itself. You simply notice how much effort has been spent holding everything together. In that notice, something softens. Not the world, not your responsibilities, but the tension with which you meet them. This is the first quiet shift. Not relief, not clarity, just a pause, long enough for the noise to be heard instead of fought. And that pause, small as it is already a movement back toward yourself. What you are feeling did not appear overnight. It formed quietly, like pressure gathering beneath still water. If the chaos you carry is not external but internal, then it matters how it was created. Daoist teachers understood this long before there were words like burnout or exhaustion. They did not explain it. They told stories because stories reach places where effort and logic cannot. There is an old tale from the mountains of ancient China. It tells of a man who lived beside a wide river at the edge of a fertile valley. The river shaped the land and set the rhythm of his life. In spring, it rose gently. In summer, it flowed swiftly. In winter, it slowed, but it never stopped. The river was not chaotic. It followed its nature. For generations, people lived with respect for this river. They left space for its movement. They built where the land allowed. They understood that its strength came from being free to flow. But this man believed something different. Each year, when the river took a small part of his field, he felt wronged. He spoke of effort, of fairness, of control. Slowly, the river became something to manage rather than something to understand. So he built walls. At first, it worked. The river stayed contained. Order returned. But control demanded constant attention. Each season required more effort. The water moved faster. The pressure grew heavier. The man slept less and tightened the walls whenever he sensed danger. He called this discipline. He called this responsibility. Then, one year, the rains came early. The river rose higher than ever before. The man reinforced the walls through the night, refusing to step back, and then the ground gave way. The river did not seep through. It broke through. Water flooded the fields, destroying far more land than the river had ever taken naturally. Years of effort vanished in a single morning. Exhausted, the man asked an old ferryman why the river had turned against him. The ferryman said, "The river did not change, you did." The river had always needed space. Its overflow released pressure. By forcing it into a narrow channel, the man created the destruction he feared. This story is not about water. It is about force. Like the man, you learned to control what made you uneasy. You built inner walls, routines, discipline, identities. At first it worked. You became capable, reliable, strong. But control came at a cost. Rest began to feel risky. Stillness felt irresponsible. And as you held tighter, pressure quietly accumulated beneath the surface. Burnout did not arrive because you were weak. It arrived because you held on too tightly for too long. Life did not turn against you. It responded to the way you constrained it. And now, the same question stands before you. What in your life are you gripping, not because it is right, but because letting go feels dangerous? Notice what happens when you sit with that question. There is no clear answer, only tension, hesitation, risk. Because what you are gripping once protected you. It kept you valued. It kept you needed. It made uncertainty bearable. These grips were not mistakes. They were responses. But what protects in one season can destroy another. Your life is not asking you to give everything up. It is asking for space for pressure to release before it becomes rupture. Letting go, in the Daoist sense, is not collapse. It is loosening the walls before they break. And it begins not with action, but with recognition, seeing where effort became strain, where discipline hardened into fear, where responsibility turned into self-constraint. The question is not, can you let go? It is gentler than that. Where could you allow a little more space without everything falling apart? That is the beginning, not a solution, not a technique, just a shift in how you see what has been happening. And once that shift occurs, what you thought was chaos reveals itself as pressure. And pressure, when given room, knows how to release itself. In the next section, we will explore what that release truly means, not as loss, but as a return to a rhythm you were never meant to abandon. And in that recognition, something unexpected happens. You realize that you have not been fighting life. You have been holding it together. The effort you now question was once care. The control you now feel trapped by was once protection. Seeing this does not weaken you. It softens you. Because when you stop treating your holding as a flaw, you no longer need to defend it. And when defense falls away, space appears, not as absence, but as relief. Relief that you do not have to force your way forward anymore. Relief that listening is not the same as giving up. Relief that easing pressure does not erase what matters. This is where the turning begins, not in action, but in permission. Permission to loosen, just enough to let life move again. If control is what created the pressure, then release cannot be an act of force. it must be a return. In Daoist practice, cultivation does not mean adding something new to yourself. It means removing what interferes with your natural movement. It is not about becoming better, stronger, or more disciplined. It is about becoming less divided. The core principle is simple, but easily misunderstood. Alignment comes from reducing inner resistance, not increasing effort. Most people hear this and imagine passivity. They think yielding means giving up, letting life fall apart, or losing direction. But Taoism never equated yielding with collapse. Yielding is not the absence of structure, it is the absence of unnecessary strain. Consider the river again. It does not abandon its course. It does not lose momentum. It simply does not argue with gravity. Its power comes precisely from not resisting what already moves through it. Inner cultivation works the same way. Your exhaustion is not asking you to stop living, it is asking you to stop over-directing your life. At the center of your fatigue is not how much you do, but how much you interfere with yourself while doing it. The constant self-monitoring, the silent pressure to perform identities that no longer fit, the background tension of needing to stay in control at all times. This is why rest alone has not helped. You rest your body, but your mind continues to manage, evaluate, rehearse, and brace. True restoration cannot occur while inner control remains rigid. The Taoist approach begins with a different question. What should I do? But where am I resisting what is already true? Resistance appears subtle. It shows up as forcing motivation when energy is low, as maintaining certainty when clarity has not yet formed, as holding on to roles because releasing them would disrupt how others see you. Each act of resistance adds friction, and friction turns movement into exhaustion. Cultivation then starts with subtraction, not quitting your life, not dismantling everything, but gently loosening the places where you are gripping without necessity. This might look like allowing a day to have uneven rhythm, letting a decision remain unresolved a little longer, releasing the need to immediately explain, justify, or optimize your experience. These are not dramatic changes. In fact, if they feel dramatic, they are likely still driven by force. True cultivation feels quiet, almost anticlimactic, because when resistance softens, effort naturally decreases. When effort decreases, awareness expands, and when awareness expands, alignment begins to reappear, not as something you achieve, but as something you stop interrupting. The Taoists call this Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, but more accurately understood as non-interference. Action still happens, life still moves, but it moves without the constant tension of being pushed. This is the principle you have been missing. You do not need to rebuild yourself. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to control your way back into peace. You need to allow what is already aligned to surface once the pressure eases. Cultivation is not a path forward, it is settling back. And from that settling, clarity emerges on its own. What you are struggling with is not abstract. It is not philosophical. It is lived quietly, repeatedly, every day. It begins the moment you wake up. Before you think, before you choose, you step into expectation, not one expectation, but many. At work, you are expected to be efficient, responsive, and composed. In your personal life, you are expected to be present, understanding, emotionally available. In private, you are told to grow, to heal, to become clearer while still holding everything else together. Each part of your life moves at a different rhythm, and none of them slow down for the others. So you adjust, you shift your tone, you shift your posture, you shift which parts of yourself are allowed to appear. At work, uncertainty stays inside while competence is displayed. With others, edges soften to preserve connection. Alone, questions surface about which version of you is real. This constant shifting rarely feels dramatic. It feels normal, responsible, adult. But slowly something begins to fracture. You are no longer only managing tasks. You are managing yourself. And managing selves requires continuous inner control. This is where the principle you have just encountered begins to matter, because non-interference becomes almost impossible when your life demands constant self-correction. Even when the day ends, the adjustment does not. The body lies down, but the mind stays alert. It replays conversations, it prepares explanations, it braces for what comes next. This is why rest has not restored you, because the interference never truly stopped. Modern systems reward this state. They call it professionalism, they call it resilience, they call it being high functioning. But high functioning is not the same as being aligned. It means you have learned to override your signals efficiently. So yielding feels unsafe. Slowing down feels irresponsible. Letting go of rigid roles feels like losing ground. Instead of releasing, you endure. Instead of settling, you adapt. And adaptation without resolution becomes exhaustion. This is the modern adult conflict. Not that life asks too much, but that it asks for different versions of you at the same time without offering space for them to come back together. Seen this way, burnout is no longer mysterious. It is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the cost of holding a contradiction together with effort. You are tired not because you cannot handle life. You are tired because you have been carrying too many selves at once. Nothing here is asking you to abandon work, relationships, or responsibility. It is only asking you to notice where your life requires constant self-interference, where effort comes from fear rather than necessity, where identity is maintained for safety rather than truth, where movement continues simply because stopping feels dangerous. Seeing this clearly does not resolve everything, but it removes something essential, the belief that something is wrong with you. And when that belief loosens, space begins to open. In the next section, we will explore what alignment looks like inside modern life, not as escape, but as a way of working, relating, and moving without losing your center each time you adapt. There's a moment that often comes after insight. It is quiet, and it is confusing. You begin to see where you have been forcing. You recognize the patterns. You loosen your grip even slightly. And then life pulls you back. Old habits return. The tension resurfaces. The mind tightens again. At this point, many people assume something has gone wrong. They call it failure. They call it relapse. They tell themselves they lost progress or didn't do it right. But this moment is not a mistake. It is the next stage of cultivation, because the moment you stop forcing, you begin to feel what force is holding down. When control softens, sensitivity returns. When effort eases, signals become clearer. What was once numbed by constant doing becomes perceptible again. This can feel like regression. In reality, it is contact. Contact with habits that were built for protection. Contact with identities that once kept you functional. Contact with fear that control was designed to manage. Resistance does not appear because you are doing something wrong. It appears because something old is being asked to release. And release threatens the structures that kept you safe. So the body tenses, the mind rationalizes, the familiar urge to tighten returns. This is not failure, this is conditioning. You did not choose these patterns consciously. They formed through repetition, expectation, and necessity. They are not undone by insight alone. Cultivation here does not mean pushing through resistance. It means recognizing it without turning against yourself. The Daoists did not treat resistance as an enemy. They understood it as information. Information about where force once served a purpose, about where letting go still feels dangerous. So when you find yourself gripping again, the task is not to correct it. It is to notice the moment without adding judgment, to see how quickly effort reappears, how to automatically control resumes, how deeply the habit of interference is wired. This notice is not passive. It is precise. It is the difference between being caught in resistance and standing beside it. Over time, this changes the relationship entirely. Instead of fighting relapse, You become curious about it. Instead of shaming yourself, you listen. Instead of demanding consistency, you allow rhythm. And rhythm is what alignment actually looks like. Progress in this way is not linear. It moves like the river, advancing, receding, adjusting without losing its direction. Each return to tension is not a step backward. It is another opportunity to release with less force than before. This is why patience matters more than discipline here, why kindness is more than willpower, why awareness outlasts control. Cultivation is not proven by how long you remain calm. It is revealed by how gently you return when you are not. So if you find yourself tired again, tight again, lost again, do not assume you have failed. You are simply touching the edge of an old habit, and now you are aware enough to meet it differently. There is a quieter law beneath everything you have seen so far. It does not announce itself. It does not demand belief. It reveals itself only when force recedes. Alignment is not something you create. It is something that appears when interference lessens. This is the deeper law. Most people imagine alignment as a state, a feeling of calm, clarity, or certainty that arrives and stays. But alignment is not static. It is relational. It emerges moment by moment from how closely your actions match your actual condition. When you are tired and keep pushing, misalignment forms. When you are uncertain and force certainty, misalignment deepens. When you feel resistance and override it, alignment dissolves, not because resistance is bad, but because resistance carries information. The deeper law is this: life organizes itself when you stop insisting on how it should move. This does not mean abandoning intention. It means releasing insistence. A tree does not decide when to grow leaves. It responds to temperature, light, and timing. When conditions are right, growth happens. When they are not, stillness is not failure. It is intelligence. Your inner life follows the same law. Alignment is not about staying calm. It is about staying honest with what is present. If energy is low, alignment is pacing. If clarity is missing, alignment is waiting. If emotion is heavy, alignment allows weight without adding judgment. This is why forcing positive states never lasts. They contradict what is real, and contradiction always costs energy. The deeper law does not ask you to feel better. It asks you to feel accurately. When feeling becomes accurate, action naturally adjusts. Effort softens without collapsing. Movement continues without strain. Direction remains, but urgency fades. This is not something you practice once. It is something you repeatedly return to. Each time you choose honesty over performance, you realign. Each time you let rhythm replace urgency, you realign. Each time you stop arguing with your own condition, you realign. Alignment, then, is not fragile. It is resilient because it adapts. What breaks alignment is not changed, it is insistence. This is why life felt so heavy before. Not because you were off your path, but because you were trying to walk it faster than it could carry you. The deeper law does not promise ease. It promises coherence, and coherence is what allows life to move without tearing you apart from the inside. And as this trust in the body deepens, your relationship with control begins to change. You no longer treat the body as something to override in order to keep life moving. You begin to recognize it as the first place where alignment or misalignment appears. This changes how quickly you respond. Instead of reacting immediately, you sense first a tightening in the chest, a holding in the jaw, a shallow breath that signals urgency before the mind turns it into pressure. These signals are not obstacles. They are early messages. When you listen at this level, you intervene less dramatically. You pause earlier. You adjust sooner. You no longer wait until collapse to give yourself permission to change course. This is how integration becomes practical without becoming mechanical. You are not scanning yourself for problems. You are staying in contact. Contact allows choice. When the body speaks and is heard, the mind does not need to shout. When the mind quiets, The deeper sense of direction has space to surface. This is what it means for soul to guide, not as a belief system, but as a felt orientation toward what matters. Integration, then, is not balance in the sense of perfection. It is responsive. You move, and the body responds. You listen, and the mind adjusts. You sense direction, and action follows without strain. Life continues to be complex. Decisions still carry weight. Pressure does not disappear. But the cost changes. You stop paying for movement with self-violence. You stop sacrificing inner coherence to maintain an external pace. And slowly, the body learns that it is no longer being ignored. Tension releases faster. Recovery happens sooner. Signals become clearer instead of louder. This is why embodied alignment feels stable, even when circumstances are not, because stability is no longer coming from control, but from communication. From here on, alignment does not need to be remembered. It is felt, and what is felt can be trusted. In the next section, we will follow this embodied alignment into identity itself, not to rebuild who you are, but to see how identity naturally refines when body, mind, and direction are no longer at odds. And with this listening, something else begins to soften. The constant sense that you must be ahead of yourself, the pressure to anticipate every outcome, the need to stay braced just in case. When the body is no longer treated as an obstacle, you stop living slightly in front of your own life. You arrive where you are. This arrival does not feel dramatic. It feels ordinary, almost forgettable. But it changes how time is experienced. Moments no longer rush past while you prepare for the next one. You are here long enough for experience to register, and registration is what restores continuity. Without it, life becomes a series of tasks. With it, life becomes inhabitable again. This is why embodiment matters more than insight. Insight can tell you what is true. Embodiment lets you live it. As body, mind, and direction stay in conversation, you begin to trust your internal pacing. You know when to lean in without forcing. You know when to pause without guilt. This knowledge is not intellectual, it is sensed. It shows up as a feeling of enough effort, enough explanation, enough holding. And because of that, you begin to conserve energy without trying to. You stop spending it on self-monitoring. You stop leaking it through inner conflict. You stop burning it to stay acceptable. Energy returns not as motivation, but as availability. Availability to respond rather than react, to listen rather than brace, to move without dragging yourself forward. This is how integration stabilizes, not by making you calm, but by making you coherent. You still feel stress. You still feel urgency at times, but these states move through you instead of settling as your baseline. The body no longer has to shout. The mind no longer has to argue. The deeper sense of direction no longer has to hide. And because of that, alignment becomes self-correcting. When you drift, you notice sooner. When you tighten, you release earlier. When you lose contact, you know how to return. Return becomes familiar, not as a technique, but as a feeling of coming back inside yourself. And once that feeling is known, it becomes the reference point, not perfection, not constant ease, just contact. From this contact, life continues, and you continue with it present enough to be changed by what you live, without losing yourself in the process. Alignment does not ask you to become someone new. It asks you to stop carrying what no longer fits. This matters because one of the deepest fears beneath exhaustion is the fear that rest will erase you, that letting go will undo what you have built, that easing pressure will cost you your identity. For a long time, identity felt like something you had to construct, a role to perform, a version of yourself to maintain, not because it was always true, but because it worked. These identities helped you survive. They helped you belong. They helped you succeed in systems that rewarded consistency more than coherence. So of course, releasing them feels dangerous. It can feel like erasure, like losing ground, like betraying the effort that carried you here. But refinement is not destruction. It is subtraction without violence. And this distinction is what allows alignment to feel safe. Identity refinement begins quietly, when you start noticing the difference between who you are and who you keep performing. Some identities demand constant effort. They require rehearsal. They need defense. They tighten the body and narrow attention. Others feel different. They are quieter. They require less explanation. They allow breath. Alignment does not push you toward these identities by force. It draws you toward them through fatigue. You stop sustaining what exhausts you, not out of rebellion, not out of collapse, but out of honesty. This is why refinement often feels anticlimactic. There is no dramatic break, no announcement, no reinvention, just a gradual disinterest in pretending. You speak with less polish, but more truth. You choose with less certainty, but more integrity. Roles fall away, not because you reject them, but because they no longer organize your energy. And what remains is not emptiness, it is clarity. Clarity about what you're willing to carry. Clarity about where you no longer interfere with yourself, just to remain recognizable. This is how identity becomes responsive, rather than rigid. It adjusts with context, without losing its center. That is the difference between reinvention and refinement. Reinvention demands force. Refinement follows alignment. One fractures continuity. The other restores it. You are not erasing your past selves. You are integrating them, keeping what still serves, releasing what no longer does. And in that process, something essential shifts. Identity stops being a performance you must sustain and becomes a presence you can inhabit. Not to impress, not to prove, but to live inside your own life with less weight. And from here, the question is no longer, who should I become? It becomes something gentler and more enduring. What can I stop carrying now? When alignment settles, your relationship with time changes. Not because time slows down, but because you stop fighting it. Before, time felt like pressure, something you were behind on, something you needed to catch up with or make up for. Regret lived there. In the past, you replayed. In the versions of yourself you judged for not knowing sooner, not choosing differently, not doing better. But regret softens when you see clearly what you were working against. You were not careless with your life. You were managing survival with the tools you had. The effort you once resented was not wasted. It carried you here. Alignment does not erase the past. It recontextualizes it. You stop asking, why did I live that way? And begin to see why it made sense at the time. From that understanding, forgiveness appears, not as an idea, but as relief. Time then stops feeling like an accusation. It becomes a landscape. You move through it without rushing to justify your existence. This is where legacy quietly enters. Not legacy as achievement, not legacy as impact measured from the outside, but legacy is how you lived inside your own life. Did you move with constant inner resistance, or did you learn to listen? Did you override yourself, or did you eventually return? The deeper truth is this: your life does not need to look impressive to be complete. What matters is coherence, that your actions, your values, and your inner state were not always at war. The path forward is not a new path. It is the same life, walked with less interference. You will still choose. You will still err. You will still tighten at times. But now you know how to return. Not dramatically, not perfectly, just honestly. The future does not require a grand plan. It requires attentiveness, listening when tension appears, pausing when urgency feels false, letting rhythm guide what force once pushed. This is how alignment continues, quietly, imperfectly, faithfully. And when time eventually looks back at you, it will not ask how fast you moved or how much you controlled. It will reflect something simpler, that you learned at last how to live without leaving yourself behind.